Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Story Hour. I'm your host, Daniel Marcus. My co-host is Laura Blackwell, and we hope that you are all healthy and safe, taking care of yourselves and your loved ones. And in spite of good news about vaccines, we're still locked down, we're still shut in. It's gonna be a long winter, and we're still looking for distraction and amusement, and maybe a little more than that. Story Hour turns to what I think is the second oldest form of entertainment in human history, which is basically people sitting around the fire telling lies to each other. So that's what we do every week here. We have two authors, about 30 minutes each. And as well, each week, we will offer a couple of brief PSAs suggested by the authors, which might give you some ideas, if you're fortunate enough to be in a position to do so, how you might help your community. So our guests tonight are E.M. Markoff and Anya Martin. E.M. is reading tonight for tenantstogether.org, which is dedicated to defending and advancing the rights of California tenants to safe, decent, and affordable housing. It's a great cause. Anya is reading tonight for the Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health, which works in partnership with tribal communities to design public health programs that raise the health status, self-sufficiency, and health leadership of Native people to the highest possible level. It's also an outstanding cause. The link for donations is https://caih.jhu.edu/give it. And Laura, if you would slam that into the chat pod, that would be great. If you're here via Zoom, please mute your mic, but feel free to leave your camera on if you're so inclined, and feel free to use chat. Of course, if you're visiting us from Facebook Live, we can't see you, but feel free to kibitz in the comments, and we can have a look later. Before we started, we didn't decide who was going to kick it off. So I'm open to suggestions. Which one of you would like to lead?
I'm fine either way. What do you want to do?
All right, Anya, if it's okay with EM, we'll start with you.
Okay.
Anya Martin was weaned on Friday Night Frights. Has always rooted for the monster and regrets abandoning her earliest career aspiration, was paleontology. Oddly enough, that was also my earliest career aspiration, no fooling. Her debut collection, Sleeping with the Monster, was published by Leith Press in 2018. Her novella, Grass, was a 2016 Dim Shores limited edition chapbook, republished in Spanish translation by Dilatando Mentes Editorial in 2020. Her most recent, oh, nice cover. Her most recent story, All the Things We Need to Kill Squish, is available now in Eidolon online and will appear in the 2021 Broken Eye Books Anthology, Cooties Shot Required. Her fiction has appeared in many anthologies and journals. There's a great list here. I'm going to kind of sample a few. Eternal Frankenstein, Tales from a Talking Board, Cthulhu Ftagan, outstanding, and Resonator, New Lovecraftian Tales from Beyond, Borderlands 6, Daybreak Magazine, on and on. Great list. She co-hosts and produces the Outer Dark podcast and symposium with Scott Nicolay. She's also half Finnish, holds a BA in anthropology from Smith. I lived in NoHo for many years. So yeah, I lived like right down the road from Smith. So on School Street for a bunch of years. And she's the founder and blogger-in-chief of atlretro.com. Has penned a regular column on jumbo mortgages for Wall Street Journal. Keep up with her publishing news at www.anyamartin.com. And on Twitter, she is Anya99. So take it away, Anya. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. This is Sleeping with the Monster. I should have held it up when
Sure.
But I'm going to read from it. So you're going to see a lot of the cover of this book anyway, but this is my debut collection that came out now a couple of years ago.
It's a lovely cover.
And I'm going to read you a story from this collection, which I picked because I thought it was a good match with Story Hour. in that it's not like too far out there on the horror side. It's not like gory or a lot of trigger warnings. It's more like a dark fairy tale, but I'm going to call it a postmodern dark fairy tale. So, and while you may empathize with the characters, there's a lot of irony in here. So it's just fine to laugh at a little bit at the, you know, in that kind of ironic sense, if you want to. It's called Blackstone Roses and Granite Gazanias. And it started with a story prompt where I remembered sitting in front of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and then it just sort of came together. I don't know if I should say anything more, but I tend to just go for just starting to read. And if there's any comments afterwards or questions, I'm happy to take them. Blackstone Roses and Granite Gazanias. Waves of moonlight descend from the heavens and illuminate gargoyles. Their tongues glisten when glimpsed in the lenses of binoculars focused skyward, delicious green and blue and yellow. Beware women who dream and transform the spotlights of bateau mouche tour boats shining on the gray walls of Notre Dame de Paris into eerie rainbows of the damned and speak in riddles rather than fair modern sentences. Is she self-consciously postmodern, endowing the text of her life with excess meaning and a strained consciousness all her own? Or is she a throwback to an over-intellectual, mooning past age of romanticism, women like Mary Shelley, who could be brought down to domesticity by Shelley-esque scoundrels, dashing assholes who composed odes in their honor and idolized the devil as the ultimate revolutionary, women who would otherwise choose to remain alone, or at least they'd say so. The power of language, the red-haired woman's continued to scribble on her pad, can be a curse. There are ways to write which are applauded and others to be entered into with only the utmost caution. For if words are combined experimentally, they must be obnoxiously avant-garde to attract accolades and never romantic. I heard her writings quoted on the best authority by a crotchety old French street bum who claimed he saw this woman cross a forbidden line. He claimed he saw her talking to a demon who once was a gargoyle, who said he was carved with a chisel by the hands of a young apprentice sculptor from Flanders who had ended up in Florence, an artisan with long, thick, dark hair. If you look carefully up at the far right corner of Notre Dame, you can spy an empty perch where the demon gargoyle once sat, a gnarled corpse of a warthog dripping from his fangs. This gargoyle dreamed nightmares, and under the weight of his passion, they came true. A man passing the cathedral felt the urge to steal his neighbor's horse, and the next day he found himself suspended from the gallows. A young noblewoman was filled with such enthrallment for the Almighty that she would beg a brick mason to wall her into a tiny cubicle so that she could, without distraction, devote her entire life to God. A mob gathered and headed towards the Bastille, transforming a revolution instigated by intellectuals with the best of intentions into a bath of blood. As for our heroine, she was just a student of English literature at Plath College. They often are. Aspiring wordsmiths fed heavy doses of Dickens, like medicine, and Shakespeare, which teaches you everything. And Eliot, poetry takes lots of work, but mostly suffering. And Nin, she cheated for pleasure. Either writers or artists or musicians or dancers or actors or occasionally just dreamers. Her name was Ivy. Well, not her real name. It was Lois, but her soul name was Ivy, after Poison Ivy of the Cramps, and that was what her friends called her. Or was it that she was just captivated by the green vines that she pretended transformed the walls of her parents' otherwise unremarkable suburban brick branch house to make it look more like a castle? Or drawn to the poison ivy, which her mother warned her against as a child, the pink rash, which was a sensation she had never experienced, like the excitement and pain of true love, which she had only read about in books. Now the child, who had waded unscathed through those fields of poison ivy, had grown into a woman a woman on the verge of graduation, a woman who craved to be more than a writer, more than a reader and a teacher and a voyeur of lovers' trysts. She played with her pen diligently, tried to fulfill some uncertain peak of literary perfection, somewhere above bodice ripper paranormal romance novels and below critically acclaimed learn and lived pretentiousness. She was always thinking she'd just know it when she reached it, and thus constantly revising texts that she had written in staggered bursts between term papers and exams and frivolous journeys pursued simply for the sake of knowledge. Like this trip to Paris, Ivy was on day 9 and slated to return to New Jersey tomorrow. The stay had proved disappointing, maybe because of 2 days lost due to an annoying stomach bug contracted after eating a very oily pizza napoletana in a grubby Italian restaurant, but more likely because she'd been on a tight budget, feeling unmercifully shy and alone while wandering the streets of Paris. Ivy had spent most of this final evening bemoaning the pointlessness of this foolish trip while taking an obligatory stroll up her least favorite street in Paris, Les Champs-Élysées. Paris's most famous boulevard was way too commercial for her and packed with tourists. Still, it was necessary to see the Arc all lit up at night at least once on any trip to Paris, she told herself. She grabbed the metro back to Hôtel de Ville station and was in the midst of that last walk across the Ile de la Cité to her favorite street in Paris, Boulevard Saint-Michel, and back to L'Homme Latin, the tiny left bank hotel where she always stayed, and her parents had stayed before her, though back then it had only cost $1 a night, nestled a block from the Musée de Cluny. On the way, she made her favorite stop of the evening, a luxuriously long pause to sit on a ledge on the edge of the square in front of the towering Gothic facade of Notre-Dame de Paris. Notre-Dame at night was for Ivy the most magical place that she had ever been on earth. She could sense the cathedral's age and power resonating from the stone itself. Its history extended back centuries before the cars that skirted periodically before its base, long before the tourists who so enthusiastically scurried to pose before the heavy wooden doors of the central west portal, its arches carved with scenes that chronicled the Last Judgment. In that age of great spiritualistic wonder, when the figures were sculpted, people fervently believed in God, and he was a living aspect of every part of one's daily existence. But the devil also played an integral role in everyone's daily life, an omnipresent threat to every man's ascent to eternal happiness in heaven. Everything reaches up to heaven in the Gothic cathedral, every arch, every buttress, every saint carved in the walls. But the great arched doorways with their parades of apostles included devils in their citizens, and the gargoyles loomed above and spit God's water down onto the streets to drain from the famous sewers of Victor Hugo, where Inspector Javert chased Jean Valjean, dripping even into the depths of the soil below the concrete shell of modern Paris, into the catacombs stacked with bones and hell beneath. Some things never change from century to century. Ivy was writing all this down, whispering as she wrote, the fever of creativity propelling the words into her mind, from her mind onto her tiny notebook. She forced 2 sentences between every line to ensure she had room for all the thoughts that urgently poured from what she was sure was some deep pocket of her soul. She gazed up occasionally, fascinated by the periodic explosions of headlights pouring past the ancient cathedral in sudden rhythmic intervals, each time the traffic light on the left bank of the bridge changed from red to green. According to the gargoyle, the sheer volume of her passion was what awakened him, while his comrades stayed still in the slumber of the centuries. Or maybe it was that pesky memory buried in his granite soul that he had once been human, a man with long dark hair who drank a toast in a black goblet to Mephistopheles and agreed to sculpt the most terrifying beast ever hewn from stone. That foolish man, younger in mind than his years should have made him, craved compliment and fame from the pursuit of ugliness through his scalpel. He also once loved a simple peasant girl, just for the way the sun shone on her auburn hair. But he now was doomed never to love anyone for so simple and pure a reason again. Or was he? He saw her whisper, crested. He says her whisper crested on an accidental wind, a breeze that blew up from the square right to the crevice where he sat perched with the boar's head clamped between his fangs. His ear twitched first, the stone melting gently into flesh. Then his eyes blinked open, and he found that he could see a young woman in a denim jacket with long, wildly teased scarlet hair scrawling madly on a tiny pad of paper below. He let the boar fall from his fangs for the first time in 5 centuries and leapt joyfully into the black air. For several minutes, the foul monster just hovered, supported by his bat-like wings, glorying in his newfound freedom. Then he flew to each of the monstrous companions with whom he had believed himself doomed to spend eternity. He taunted them and laughed in his most bestial expression of glee. But they sat, as always, unmoving, blind to everything, including any hypothetical demons from which they were supposed to be protecting God's house. Pitiful watchman, the devil had sneered, a smelly gentleman with long matted goatee and yellow slime dripping from his nostrils back in the 15th century. Of course, today he dresses much better, neater, looks a lot like Brad Pitt. Last century, he resembled Mick Jagger. Before that, Lord Byron and Alexander Hamilton, Oliver Cromwell, and Sir Walter Raleigh, each in his own time. Lucifer had gotten into a good snicker about transforming a dreamer of darkness into a true demon and then forcing him into the body of his own grotesque creation, not to mention imprisoning him on the peak of God's most beautiful house, the only gargoyle with a true consciousness. Another sip from the black chalice, and young Hans felt his body hardening into a denizen of the damned, precisely the kind of creature whom gargoyles, despite their monstrous appearance, were supposed to frighten away. Hans felt the center of his heart congeal and harden, picturing the red organ darkening to black as any remaining stray goodness seeped out of his brain and body. He became evil made flesh. Therefore now he could not help but gloat that he was awake and free, while his fellow gargoyles stared with raccoon eyes into the night at nothing like they had for centuries, creatures of lifeless stone. He whizzed by each one, sniffing it. No scent, only the pungent odor of gasoline exhaust fumes rising from the street below. He'd grown not to mind that stand ship being less noxious than the multitude of aromas of earlier centuries, the eras before baths and sanitation. Hans was glorying in his new awakening up above when the flood of language in Ivy's head suddenly dried up. When the words no longer flowed, she happened to look up, and she saw his beastly form hovering from gargoyle to gargoyle, heavy black bat wings flapping above a dark shadow of a body and thrashing a long, thick tail crested by pointed spikes. Ivy didn't scream. She just stood, her notebook dropping from her hand onto the ground, where it was found the next day by an American editor in desperate need of something provocative to add fresh juice to his very New York literary horror anthology of great renown. He told an editor friend about her, and they tried to track her down to commission her to pen a novel, but that was later, and much too late. For now, Ivy stared so hard at Hans that he whirled around, throwing his bulbous jaws downwards in her direction and narrowing his large yellow eyeballs to slits in order to appear especially ferocious. Needless to say, it was love at first sight. Hans motioned for her to follow him around the side of the cathedral, and she advanced in his direction into the shadowy side street. After all, he didn't want dopey, camera-toting tourists from Nebraska or Tokyo spying on their heart-filled lovers' trysts, to which she was luring her. She walked around the corner, past an empty cafe and dark shop windows. He flew for several blocks just to make certain that no one would observe their clandestine meeting, no one interrupt his feasting on her flesh. Finally, he led her into an ancient narrow alley and touched down onto his haunches in front of a row of thin metal garbage pans, spilling over with paper and banana peels and wine bottles. Being a demon, of course, he frothed at the mouth and raised his lips to reveal the long line of pointed fangs. Ivy turned to run, suddenly overcome with fear, but he grabbed her with a clawed paw and was surprised to find himself apologizing profusely. It's just that I'm unused to this new freedom, he said. Et tu es très belle, he added, et très mal. Mal means evil, Ivy mused to herself, still a little frightened. She thought of Cocteau's La Belle et la Bête, one of her favorite films of all time. But that beast was attracted to the goodness in beauty. She then briefly recalled her own fancy that she was born a dark fairy in a land of the night, exiled to the dull monotony of mortal existence, because her mother had dared to love the dark prince of dreams who was betrothed to the Earl King's daughter. This nymph of the night within her made her turn cold towards nice guys who had crushes on her, questing ever for the ideal elven lord of darkness who loved her too. Relationship problems were easy to explain away when they were the consequence of a curse, right? But Ivy had made up this metaphor on a lonely night in Des Moines and confessed it only to her journal. Now she stared at the beast and wondered suddenly if her tale might have some veracity. It's not true, Hans said, because demons can read minds. Not true that you're anything but human. She felt a sudden urge to cry. I was human too, Hans continued. He paused to spit. I was once a Flemish sculptor named Hans Bogert. Then the gargoyle told his story, and she did cry, drawn as much to her imagination of the handsome man he must have been as to the tormented evil that dominated his being today. She stroked the dark green scales that coated his back and laid her lips upon the side of his snout. In one long moment, he transformed into a slender, naked man with deep cheekbones, a long mane of dark hair, and delicate, long fingers. Would you like to live forever? Hans asked. Would you like to see the centuries endlessly pass before your eyes? Men and women make the same mistakes over and over again. Would you like to live your life without purpose? Ivy queried back. To read, to write, to create for no one but yourself. How could she, a woman with such a romantic nature bursting from her giant heart, love a man so attractive as if he was such a vile monster in his soul? She posed the question to herself, and then remembered she was a romantic. A romantic hears the call of love. In a quick heartbeat, she inspected his face closely, because she desperately yearned to understand how such a volume of violence could ascend from any living creature. She ignored the answer and instead replaced logic with pity and a sense of mission. She herself would bring this poor, tortured, and yet beautiful man back to perfection through the sheer power of her love. But then, what is evil? Ivy searched her mind and thought of world leaders and politicians and businessmen and women. Whatever the demon had done with his mind control, she'd seen far worse on the 24-hour news. Tiny pranks in comparison. She gazed into Hans's eyes and nodded. The naked man gathered her into his arms and became the beast again. He spread his wings and carried her up into the night, cool air blowing against her cheeks as they flew up the edge of the cathedral. She grazed her fingers against the row of flying buttresses. She asked to touch the stained glass of the great rose window, and he swung around to let her. They flew up then, and she reached her hand to the stars. Hands glided over the Seine, and for a moment a blue light from a Batumush boat sparkled against the tip of his right wing. He pulled it in quickly, and for a moment he lost his balance. They fell right into the spotlights, and Ivy waved, but the boat was almost empty, the last run of the evening. Only a small boy gazed up in wonder and waved back, the handful of other tourists all fixated on the cathedral. Hans extended his wings again, and the couple were flying above the lights of the tourist boat, over the crowded traffic and cafes of Boulmiche, and circling toward the needle tip of Tour Eiffel, its metal spire illuminated tonight in golden yellow. Over the roofs of Paris they flew, over the Arc de Triomphe, and down the wide avenue of Champs-Élysées. Hans dipped down close to the crest of l'Obélisque de Luxor and the mad traffic of Concorde. Then he curved towards the Corinthian columns of La Madeleine and whisked her east past the white dome of Sacré-Cœur, atop the hill of Montmartre, the highest point in Paris. He headed north, above streams of apartments, shops, houses, train stations. Then once the city limits had finally faded into black countryside, he spun west under a clear, starry sky. An hour or two later, she felt the wind quicken as he flew out over the sea somewhere south of Mont Saint-Michel. Maybe another half hour passed, her body wafted with colder and colder air, when over the Atlantic he dove. Ivy died almost instantly, her icy liquid filling her lungs with the impact, and she, startled by the frigid water's embrace, gave herself over to death's passion without any struggle. Holding her in his arms, he watched her green eyes close, her red hair expand like a corona of fire in the water. She looked like a mermaid in the moonlight, he thought. In some other lifetime, she might have been dangerous. In any lifetime, she would have been left behind. Hans the monster opened his own mouth now to let the water flood his throat, halt the pumping of his own lungs. He tasted what he imagined would be death, final and total escape from the monotony of the centuries and the curse played upon him by his own folly. As the ocean entered, he felt his skin swell, his flesh harden and drag him down beneath the water. He waited for consciousness to slip away, but just felt himself sinking, Ivy's limp body still entwined in his arms. At that moment, he realized that it wasn't the heaviness of death, but the weight of his body returned to Granite that was pulling him leagues and leagues deep into the black sandy bottom of the Atlantic. Then, as if the devil's final joke was to return him as approximately as possible to his former self, a small shark swam in his path and got caught in his jaw. It flapped its tail fins in panic, trying to break from the grip of the stone teeth to no avail. The demon gargoyle, who once was a man, no longer gazes down from the high pinnacle of God's castle, but instead stares forever up from a hell of pitch black water. Ivy's body is now decaying, her hair completely gone, her face withered and pockmarked as the water slowly eats away at her flesh, locked in his rocky embrace. At some point soon, he knows he will just hold bones, and even those, the water will whittle away until he is finally fully alone, his night vision allowing him only the shadowy sight of the constant stream of fluttering seaweed, slow-moving crustaceans, and schools of fish that might be plain or exotic. So.
Oh, pleased to meet you. Hope you guessed my name.
Yeah. Great. Well, it's not really a deal with the devil story, I always say. but the devil certainly plays a role.
That was great fun. Thank you. All right.
Pleasure. Thanks for asking me to read tonight.
You bet. You bet. I'll just have to pause 5 or 10 seconds, take a deep breath, shift gears for the next author. So I'm going to do that. Brief pause, deep breath. All right. Latinx author and publisher E.M. Markoff writes about damaged heroes and imperfect villains. What else is there to write about, really?
Agreed.
Works include The Deadbringer, To Nurture and Kill, and Leaving the Number 9. Under her imprint Tomes and Coffee Press, she published Tales for the Campfire, a charity anthology to raise money for California wildfire recovery and relief efforts. Awesome. She's a member of the Horror Writers Association and is mostly made up of coffee, cat hair, and whiskey. EM, take it away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. No, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm going to be reading my short ghost story, Leaving the Number 9. And just like Anya, I'm going to jump straight into it. Okay. So, Leaving the Number 9. Adelia? Adelia, hey, hey, that voice. Miguel. Yes, Miguel. Hey, I'm fine, Miguel. I swatted my brother's arm away and leaned against the side of the counter to steady myself. My head was spinning. My mouth tasted like sand and iron. I had bitten my tongue, drawing blood. Miguel brought me a glass of water and a stool. I was fine, truly. The day was just too damn hot and had finally caught up to me. Outside, past the storefront windows, I watched the number 9 bus chug by. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my wits and continued on. Think of it, Miguel. He gave me a concerned look, his lips warming around as if he were fighting back the urge to make sure I was, without a doubt, okay. I'm good, promise, I said. Yeah? He asked. Yeah. A familiar voice chimed in. Well, now, I feel a bit left out, so I'll just go ahead and say it. Yeah. Miss Siri? I asked, confused. I didn't remember seeing her walk into the shop, but it felt right that she was here. She was Miguel's best customer and the grandmother I never had. She was also my closest friend. Yes, dear? She leaned on her walking cane with one hand while the other adjusted her glasses. Nothing, I said with a smile. I was happy that she was here to share this moment with me. I began once more, rechanneling my original enthusiasm. Miguel, you're already one of the best butcher shops in the city. Why not take the chance and also become one of the best places to grab a bite to eat? A fly landed on my cheek, on the path left by the sweat dripping down my face. I swatted it away. Tourette does exactly that, my dear, Miss Siri said, and I hate to say it, but not all her dishes are bad. Miguel grunted his assent. But she's not even in our neighborhood, I protested, pointing out the obvious. Our community needs a place to eat that's within our own neighborhood, and we could be the ones to make it. You own this building, Miguel. No need to pay a landlord. His lips were twitching. That was a good sign. It's a risky venture, he said. You won't be going at it alone, I said, reassuring him. I've been putting money aside for years now, but I need your help. You have the name, the reputation, the building. I have the recipes of my clients that I cook for. They love my food. You are a force in the kitchen, he said, running the callous thumb back and forth across the dark stubble on his chin, his brown eyes twinkling. He liked my idea. I could tell. He looked at the clock on the wall. The store reopens in 5. Swing back tonight after I've closed up shop. You can let yourself in through the back. Tonight, then, after my last client. I turned to Miss Siri, unable to rein in my excitement. You will help me test out my recipes, won't you, Miss Siri? I found her staring at me over her half-moon spectacles, her amber eyes more vibrant than usual. Of course I will, but Avelia, dear, isn't tonight our weekly dinner date? I could feel my cheeks redden. I'm so sorry. I swear I didn't mean to forget. Go on, Avelia, said Miguel. I like your idea. We can talk tomorrow. Besides, I have inventory coming tonight. Chicken or rabbit, my dear? Miss Siri asked with a smile. Chicken, I said, smiling back. I'll be there. And I was. Come in, Adelia, come in. Miss Siri scanned the book she had been reading, and then, despite the crooked bend to her elderly fingers, snapped shut with a dramatic flare. Did you get far? I asked, pointing to the book. Not as far as I had expected. You're early. My mouth watered at the savory smells that greeted me in the foyer. I had been too nervous to eat all day, and now I was famished. I held out a bunch of yellow Simpo al Xochitl I had brought. I'll get the wine, Miss Siri said. The way I always did when I visited her, I went over to the little altar in the sitting room to pay my respects to Miss Siri's long-dead family. I had never met them, but I had heard so many tales about them from Miss Siri that I had come to regard them as old friends. I pinched the flowers from their stems and began arranging them around the photograph and water cup on the altar, speaking to the dead as I did so. I finally told my brother about my idea. It's for a restaurant. Please watch over me as I begin this new journey in my life. Here you go, dear, said Miss Siri. handing me a generously filled glass and then filling one for herself. The wine rippled along my glass's rim like a bloody pool, spilling a bit onto my fingers. "It'll be 7 o'clock soon," said Miss Siri. "The food will be ready just before 9. As if on cue, her clock went off, its baritone toll resonating within the room like an echo that stabbed at my temples. Miss Siri studied me over her glass, sipping her wine. I found myself thinking of my brother and turned to look back toward the darkening foyer. The twilight spilling in through the door's glass panes made the foyer appear as a long, dark tunnel. I was starting to wonder if I had made the right choice coming here tonight, then felt guilty at the thought. I cared for Miss Siri, but what if Miguel decided to change his mind overnight? What if he decided it was best to play it safe rather than take the risk of starting a whole new business? If Miguel didn't help me, then my dream would become that much harder to achieve. The anxiety would not let me be. "Should you decide to leave?" Miss Siri's voice trailed off. I turned to look at her, ashamed of my behavior. "Of course not," I said. I had already made my choice, and I would stick with it. I took a sip and relaxed. The wine was delicious. Dinner proved to be even more so. Afterward, I bid Miss Siri good night and jumped on the 9 bus to return to Miguel's shop. It wasn't unusual for him to stay until midnight. I had hoped that tonight was one of those late nights. But I was greeted by a closed-up shop. In the window hung a sign, "Closed, come back tomorrow morning." I knocked on the door, but no one answered. If Miguel was out back on the dock, he would not hear me. I looked down the narrow alley that led to the back of the meat shop, the place where Miguel did his bloody work, where flies buzzed at all hours. I did not like that place during the day, and I liked it even less at night. I decided to ignore the sign's advice and went down the alley to see if Miguel was still around. I woke up in my sheets of sweat. I woke up in a mess of sweat and tangled sheets, my sheets, in my home. I tasted blood in my mouth. I must have bitten my tongue. I fumbled in the dark for the lamp's chain, but when I finally managed to get the light going, I just barely stopped myself from throwing the lamp across the room. "Miguel!" I yelled, startled. Miguel was sitting in the rickety chair across from me. He didn't look well. How did you get in? Why didn't you tell me you were here?" He stared, but said nothing. "Did you have a row with a rancher? With your partner?" The obvious answer hit me then. "Are you drunk?" Miguel's eyes stirred in their sockets like an automaton's. Then an emotion, like anger, brought them to life. I had never been scared of my brother before, but something was wrong. "Listen, whatever it is, I'm here for you. But for fuck's sake, I think we both need a cup of coffee first." Miguel said nothing. He looked like he wanted to cry. I stuffed my feet into my slippers and did my best to be brave for him. "How did you even get it?" "I knew it. I don't care what the landlord says. I knew that cheap lock was a useless—" "Oh, dear gods!" Miguel was gone. I had not seen him move, nor had I heard his normally heavy footfalls leave. There was a faint smell in the air, like disinfectant and blood, or perhaps entrails. The door and its lock would spell the truth of it. The chain was down. The deadbolt turned. I went to the kitchen, put on a cup of coffee, and set some sage to burn in the very place I had seen my brother. Overhead, the lamplight flickered in time with the anxiety growing in my chest. I sat in the kitchen and waited for the sun to rise. I found the "Closed, come back tomorrow morning" sign waiting for me. I decided to ignore its advice again and made my way to the back of the store. The stench of disinfectant, meat, and entrails hit me even before I had stepped out of the alley and into the small courtyard. I checked the back door and found it unlocked, but I could not go in. I was scared, trapped. I thought about my brother and finally found the courage to step inside. Empty, quiet, everything neatly in place. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I walked to the front of the store and looked out the windows. There were people leaving flowers, cards, and incense all along the outside wall. I noticed my older sister among the crowd and went out to meet her. "Excuse me," I said to the people surrounding my sister. but I need to get through. Everyone continued chatting away, sparing only transient glances of annoyance for my having interrupted their conversation. I called to my sister, but she was too busy crying to notice me. "Odelia?" asked a familiar voice behind me. It was Miss Siri. "What's going on?" I asked, confused and, for some reason, scared. "Why is Jimena crying?" "My poor, sweet Odelia, you don't know what's happening, do you?" said Miss Siri. She pushed a lock of my hair behind my ear. I noticed the red blotches on the skin, around her eyes, as if she had been crying for hours. "Something's happening to Miguel, hasn't it?" I could feel the anxiety growing in the pit of my stomach. "And this pinche crowd won't let me get through to see Jimena." Miss Siri looked down at her sandaled feet and studied the end of her cane against a loose cobblestone. "Miguel is dead." The world around me began to spin. I stumbled my way to the curb, taking a seat. My mouth tasted like blood. I had bitten my tongue again. How did he? No, this can't be happening. He can't be. I could not bring myself to say, dead. Miss Siri took a seat beside me and clasped my hand firmly between hers. "No one yet knows, but rest assured the cause of death will be made public." "You make it sound as if he was killed," I asked. "Was he?" Miss Siri looked back at the crowd hovering around Jimena. Her gaze was distant, somewhere else, as she said, "Yes." The revelation shook me. I wondered if my brother would still be alive if I had not accepted Miss Siri's dinner invitation. "I saw Miguel," I said, uncertain if I really wanted to share what had happened. But I had to, or the guilt building inside of me would swallow me whole. "It was a few hours before sunrise," I said. "He was in my apartment, just sitting there, quiet, angry. But the chain was hanging, and the deadbolt was locked. It was locked! And then he vanished. Miss Siri, I saw his spirit." "His spirit? Are you listening to what you're saying?" Miss Siri asked, her hands trembling. "I'm scared," I said. "I don't know what to think. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I turned to look at Miss Siri. How did this happen? I wept on Miss Siri's shoulder, grateful that my closest friend was here with me. She stroked my hair as if I was a small child and said, "There's a curandera that lives in the farmhouse at the end of the 9 bus. Go find them. They'll know what to do." "The district at the end of the number 9 is abandoned," I pointed out, scrubbing my face dry with my hands. Miss Siri looked as if she was struggling with what to say. "Go there, Adelia. The curandera will help you." "Will you come with me?" I asked. "I wish I could go with you, my dear," she said, kissing my forehead and then rising to her feet. "But I have somewhere I need to be." I decided to take my friend's advice. It was late afternoon by the time the 9 bus pulled up. I boarded it and took a seat. Save for the driver, the bus was empty and more worn than I remembered. My fingers laced and unlaced as my mind repeated a phrase over and over and over again until I felt as if I would suffocate. "Miguel is dead. Miguel is dead. Miguel is dead." Just before sunset, a derelict farmhouse came into view, dropped in the center of a vast prairie of "for sale, reduced price" buildings that had once been the community where my parents had grown up and fallen in love. It was strange to think that a curandera lived here now. I hadn't thought anyone lived here. The bus's doors opened, and I stepped out into the twilight. Tall, skeletal trees surrounded the farmhouse like grotesque onlookers, while malformed blades of clumped grass stood guard like broken spirits. I realized then that I had forgotten to ask the driver when and if the bus would be back tonight. With nothing else to do, I was about to knock on the farmhouse door when the smell of tobacco caught my nose. I turned to look for its source and found a tall woman dressed in a long black dress leaning against a dead tree. "Can I help you?" she asked. I squinted, hoping to get a better look, but she had brought her rebozo over her eyes, obscuring the top half of her face. All I could make out was that her skin was a warm, sandy brown, like mine, her lips full and stained a deep red, like a cuetelxochitl. Sorry, I said. I'm here to see the curandera. Are you her? I am, said the curandera. She took a long drag from her cigarette, then exhaled. The smoke flitted strangely around her like a swarm of moths. And you are... I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. Adelia Quintana Reyes. The woman laughed. Am I making you uncomfortable? Not you, just what this place became. I shook my head. How can you continue to live here? Because this is my home, said the curandera, and I had more power than the people who sought to take it away from me. She snuffed out the cigarette and looked back toward the empty street. They murdered the heart of this neighborhood a long time ago, when those who made it what it was were pushed out. She spat a heavy clump that fell to the ground. As you can see for yourself, the people who took their place did not last very long. I'm sorry, I said, and I was. But this is not about them. Why are you here? The woman asked, keeping her distance. I swallowed down the lump that had lodged itself firmly in my throat. Miss Erie said you could help me. My brother was found dead this morning, but I saw him, his spirit, in my apartment. Perhaps he was killed after he visited you. No, I yelled. The pot holding my emotion started to bubble over. I know what I saw. Rather certain, aren't you? Certain, I asked, insulted. My brother was kind, generous, a pillar to our community, to our family. He always had my back, and we were going to open a restaurant together. And Miss Erie was going to try the foods on the menu, and I was finally going to see my dream happen. But now Miguel's dead, and I'll never get to talk to him again. I turned to the sound of an engine coming up the dark street. It was the 9 bus. I could board it and go home. If you came all this way just to go home, then go home. But the curandera gestured to the entrance of the farmhouse. I was certain you came here for a reason. Was I mistaken? She leaned back against the tree. The darkness around her seemed to tremble. The 9 bus pulled up and opened its doors, waiting. But I did not board. I watched it drive down the street until the night swallowed it whole. The door is unlocked, said the curandera. A loud click behind me punctuated her words. I turned to face her, my determination overriding the fear screaming at me to run away and just accept that Miguel was dead. I am here for a reason. I need to know why my brother's spirit came to visit me. I will not leave until I know why. The truth does not always lead to happiness, the curandera said, finally coming closer. But if your soul is ready to accept the truth, then enter. I'm ready, I said, and stepped into the farmhouse. The first thought to enter my mind was that I had gone crazy, and if not, then I was damned. I was back at Miss Erie's home, in the sitting room, at the dinner from the night before. In front of me stood Miss Erie, herself, and myself, dressed in a yellow and blue dress with red kitten heels. It was the exact same outfit I was wearing now. The knot in my stomach tightened, pleading for me to turn back, but I stayed and watched. The clock had just struck 7 in the evening. Should you decide to leave? Miss Erie's voice trailed off. Of course not. I'm just worried Miguel will come up with a list of reasons to not compete with Tourette and convince himself it's a bad idea before I've had a chance to tell him why it's a great idea. Miss Erie took a seat and opened her book. Go on, she said, waving this other me away with a warm smile. You have 2 hours to convince him. Make him give you an expensive wine for interrupting our dinner. And Adelia, I'm very proud of you, my dear. She beamed, this Adelia who had been praised and toasted with her friend. I followed after myself, the knot in my stomach morphing into nervous excitement that I would see Miguel. I could save him. I jumped into the 13 bus and took a seat beside myself. She looked so happy, this other me, all smiles and dreams and wine-flushed cheeks. She would save Miguel. We were greeted by a shop closed up for the night. The same annoying, closed, come back tomorrow morning sign hung in the window. I looked down the dark, narrow alley that led to the courtyard at the back of the meat shop. Go on, I urged the other me in the red kitten heels. Save our brother. I followed her down the alley into a small courtyard and onto the low loading dock. The back door to the shop was open. Straightening her shoulders, she took a few steps in and stopped. I watched her from the courtyard as she stood there, frozen. Was Miguel already dead? Angry voices poured out the door. I stepped onto the loading dock, but kept away from the door. I did not want to see my brother's dead body. Instead, I listened. Who's this? Lover, a gruff voice asked. Get away from my brother, the other me shouted. Brother, said another voice, a woman's. Adelia? Adelia has your money, not me. Ask her. It was Miguel. What money? The other me asked, confused. What are you? The money was for her restaurant, Miguel screamed, his voice high and desperate. I saw her rummaging back here. She must have found the money and taken it. I swear it's true. I swear it. The voice that spoke next was cold, greedy. How about it, little lady? You got my money? My other self was shaking her head and crying, shocked as if unable to believe that the brother she had venerated all her life had just fed her to the dogs. She turned to flee, but cruel-looking hands reached out beyond the door and dragged her into the butcher's shop. Stay away! Don't touch me! She yelled. Her voice was lost, terrified. I curled up into a ball and wept endlessly as I listened to my other self call out to her brother's name as if it were a question. Miguel! Miguel! Sometime later, the two men in suits carried out something large and heavy in a sack. I followed the drops of blood to a truck that was parked out front on the street. Deep inside, I knew I was in that sack. The blood trailing behind like water from a leaky hose was mine. I wondered where the men in the suits would dispose of my body. I went to the back of the alley and found my brother, the brother I had loved so dearly, saturating the courtyard with disinfectant to erase his betrayal. I watched as he broke down into choked sobs and angry stares. Then he was suddenly gone, and I was alone in the alley. Blood seeped from a wound over my dress. And I lost my place. Sorry. Yeah, blood seeped from a wound over my dress, staining over my heart, staining my dress. The smell and disinfectant surrounded me. The curandera had been right. The truth had led me to a broken heart, not to happiness. I was dead, an alma en pena, a soul lost in despair, a soul that had been unwilling to believe and unwilling to accept that my beloved brother had betrayed me. Was it to cover a debt? Alone? I found myself wishing I knew the reason why. From the alley's dark recesses, the curandera emerged, her dress and riboso trailing behind her like black ink. Why did you show me this? I demanded. You showed yourself, she said. When you entered the farmhouse, it was because your spirit was finally ready to confront what had happened. What happened? My brother betrayed me. He let them fucking kill me. Why? Why couldn't you just have let me leave on the bus? I took my shoe off and threw it at her. Answer me! Because you chose to stay and confront the truth on your own terms. Your soul was done lamenting. If you had chosen otherwise, her voice trailed off. What would have happened? I asked. Your soul would be lost in despair, unable to move on. Tears streamed down the curandera's cheeks. I couldn't leave you here, alone. I rose to my feet, suddenly somehow knowing who she was, even though it was impossible. Miss Theory? The curandera took a step back. Please, I begged. I really need a friend. The curandera stood there, frozen, unsure. Adelia, my dear, don't be afraid, please. And then coral snakes appeared in the air around her, pulling the rebozo away from her face. She was young and beautiful, and would have been a complete stranger if not for the amber eyes, Miss Theory's eyes, looking down at me. Is this what you really look like? I asked, stepping down from the dock and crossing over to her. You must be frightened, she said quietly. Are you really here? I asked, looking up at her, unable to believe that my dearest friend had cared enough about me to find me even in death. I am, she said with affection. I felt a weight I had not been aware of lift from me, I ran to her and she took me into her arms. She stroked my hair. Despite the hand being different, it was the same familiar, gentle strength I loved and trusted. I cried for hours, days. Who knows how time works for a grieving soul? What will happen to me now that I know the truth? I finally asked. Your soul will move on, she said. Was the Miss Theory I knew real? I asked, resting my head against her arm. Yes, but I had already become her by the time we met. Like you, she was an alma en pena. I thought about this for a moment. What is it you do? I offer people who have been wronged a chance at revenge, she said. In exchange, I ask for their bodies so that I can walk the land of the living. Do you think you can find my body and give me a proper burial? If that is what you want, I will respect your wishes, though my own heart yearns instead for revenge. But it's up to you to decide what you want. I thought about this. The man who had betrayed me with his words was no longer my brother. I would not mourn for him. There was no hesitancy in my voice. I want revenge. Are you done lamenting? She asked. I nodded. I'm going to miss you so much. And I you, Adelia. She cupped my face, her lips a soft whisper against my own. Goodbye, my dear. A gentle warmth filled my soul, and in my heart, I knew that Miss Siri had found my body. I sent her all my love and moved on. A fly landed on Adelia's closed eyelid. It sat there, buzzing, scheming, thankful that the animals had unearthed enough of the head so that it could lay its eggs and be born anew. Adelia swatted at the fly, and then brushing away the dirt on her cheek, unburied herself from the shallow grave. She snapped her legs back into place, shook the sand from her body, and stood. The blood marring her braless brown skin and tattered yellow and blue dress would have to wait until she was home. Adelia turned toward the direction of the city, the sand crunching beneath her bare feet. She made her way to the bus stop and boarded the 23 bus back to the city, back to Miguel and all those who had taken away her friend. She would have no mercy, just as they had had none. She looked out the window, the first rays of the sun bringing to life the tears and revenge burning in her amber eyes. Be at peace, my dearest friend. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Laura, once again, very thematically aligned stories. We didn't try and plan that beforehand. Happens every week. I don't think there's a week when there hasn't been some sort of a resonance between the readers, and we really don't seek that out at all. It just sort of emerges.
Something happens. And it's funny because I don't think the writers plan it together.
I don't think so. I don't think they, get on, DM each other on Twitter and figure it out,
I mean, they would be allowed, but
it'd be totally permitted, would not be transgression at all, but I don't think it happens. Anyway, 2 wonderful readings. Thank you so much. E.M. Markoff and Anya Martin, really great stories and terrific performances. Thank you very much. Another week. And thank you all out there for joining us at Story Hour again. And my fabulous co-host, Laura Blackwell, thank you so much for everything you do. Next week, we're going to have Madeline Robbins and Cliff Winnick. Cliff is a regular attendee, and this will be his second time reading with us. So we're really looking forward to next week. And stay safe, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other. And we'll see you next time. Good night.
Good night.